If he let go this time, he knew with absolute certainty that no matter how far he traveled in this life, she would be the one person forever lost to him. On the corner of her office desk sat an old picture frame, and on the back of the faded photograph tucked inside, someone had written a single line in bold, vigorous handwriting. Come to Kadax. Listen to the wind and waves beneath the olive trees. A well-timed knock on the door pulled Olive out of her reverie. A sweet-faced girl pushed the door open just enough to peek her small head through the crack. Did you hear that corporate headquarters is parachuting a new executive down to us? Of course I know. How could I miss something that huge? As the chief assistant to the executive support team, it was her literal job to know if her direct superior was being replaced. Olive let out a heavy sigh as she and Mia walked out of the corporate building together, stepping right into a sudden torrential downpour. Mia's boyfriend was already there to pick her up, leaving Olive stranded by the entrance. She stared up at the gloomy, overcast sky with a sense of utter helplessness. Being too lazy to carry an umbrella was one thing, but actually trusting the morning weather forecast was her true fatal mistake. Just as she was silently cursing the miserable weather, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the entrance. A car door swung open, and with a sharp swoosh, a black folding umbrella bloomed, separating the rainstorm from the people beneath it. Danny from the PR department stepped out of the vehicle, and upon catching sight of Olive shivering on the steps, his handsome face lit up with a brilliant smile. Olive, did you forget your umbrella? Need me to give you a ride home? Oh, I almost forgot to introduce you to, Danny said, taking a few steps before turning back to the man who had paused behind him. Mr. Fitzroy, this is the chief assistant of our executive support team, Olive Shaw. Danny kept chattering away, but not a single word registered in Olive's mind. In that fleeting instant, the blinding sunshine of Kadax, the pristine white beaches of the Mediterranean, and the olive trees trembling in the stormy night all came rushing back to her in a relentless wave of memories. She raised a hand to brush a stray lock of hair from her forehead, letting out a soft, helpless sigh. Mr. Fitzroy, it's been a long time. That polite, distant Mr. Fitzroy was enough to instantly extinguish the hopeful light that had sparked in Callum's eyes the moment he saw her. Danny glanced back and forth between the two of them. Even someone as dense as him could sense the suffocating tension in the air. He awkwardly checked the darkening sky. Mr. Fitzroy, it's getting pretty late, and I have some things to take care of at home. How about we continue your tour of the company tomorrow? Fine. Though he answered Danny, Callum's intense gaze never once wavered from Olive's face. Taking the hint, Danny quickly seized the opportunity to slip away. Olive rubbed her nose awkwardly. Well then, if there's nothing else, I should be heading out too. Goodbye, Mr. Fitzroy. As she tried to brush past him, Callum reached out and firmly gripped her wrist. Olive, did you ever go back to Kadax after everything? Olive pressed her lips together into a thin line, her expression turning deadpan and serious. No. If there's nothing else, I really need to get going. The rain is pouring, I'm barely wearing anything warm, and I'm going to catch a cold. Before she could finish, a suit jacket, still radiating his body heat, was draped heavily over her shoulders. Olive stared down at the tips of her shoes in deafening silence. But I did, he said softly. I stayed there the whole time, waiting for you. Olive froze for a split second before letting out another quiet sigh. Had she heard those words 4 years ago, she probably would have been so ecstatic she'd have gone streaking through the streets in pure joy. Now, however, she merely blinked, her lips curving into a mild, unbothered smile. Is that so? Well, that's certainly surprising. There were times when Olive profoundly missed the days she spent in Spain as a 19-year-old. She remembered the misty, rain-swept dusks, that vibrant little cafe tucked around the street corner, the shockingly colorful cocktails, and the man who appeared so outwardly cold but possessed a smile that felt warmer than the Mediterranean sun. Kadax was nestled on a sloping bay along the Cap de Creus Peninsula, where clusters of pristine white houses cascaded down the mountainside toward the sea. Framed by a rugged, rocky coastline and the deep, azure expanse of the Mediterranean, the inland slopes were dotted with sprawling olive groves and vineyards. It was a breathtakingly beautiful place. Olive's older cousin, Chloe, had opened a cafe in Kadax and spent her days constantly bragging about how carefree and idyllic her life abroad was, which prompted Olive to fly over and visit her during summer break. By the time she arrived in Kadax, dusk was rapidly closing in, the last light of the sun fading as the first stars pricked the sky. Stepping out of the airport with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and dragging a heavy suitcase behind her, Olive stood by the curb and pulled out her phone to check the address her cousin had sent. To her dismay, the entire screenshot was entirely in Spanish. She couldn't read a single letter of it. She flagged down the first taxi she saw and shoved her phone screen through the window. The driver squinted at it, shook his head, fired off a rapid string of Spanish she completely failed to comprehend, and drove away. The second driver furrowed his brow and gestured wildly for a solid minute, but she still couldn't decipher his meaning. The third driver actually nodded and threw out a price, but having absolutely no frame of reference, she couldn't tell if it was a fair rate or a massive tourist scam. As she stood there hesitating, the driver lost his patience and peeled off as well. Dragging her luggage back to the sidewalk, Olive glanced up at the darkening sky, feeling entirely helpless. Right at that moment, a man walked up to her, took one look at the screenshot on her phone, and turned to a nearby taxi driver waiting for fares. He casually rattled off a few sentences in fluent Spanish. The driver nodded immediately, his previously bored expression shifting into a friendly, cooperative smile. The man then turned back to her and asked, "I know this address. But who exactly is Chloe to you?" The way Olive looked at Callum right then was akin to a dehydrated traveler spotting a signpost in the dead center of the desert. It felt like an absolute miracle to bump into someone who actually knew her cousin. "She's my cousin." He offered a small smile. "I'll take you to her." Olive slipped into the passenger seat of Callum's car, brushing the light dusting of rainwater off her clothes before she finally remembered her manners. "I haven't even asked your name yet." Instead of answering, Callum countered with a question of his own. "You've got a lot of nerve, hopping into a stranger's car without a second thought. Aren't you worried I might be a bad guy?" The young woman laughed, her face lighting up with an animated, vivid energy, her dark eyes shining clear and bright as she looked at him. "A guy like you? You don't look like a bad person." Callum let out a quiet chuckle. "A guy like me? You have a broad forehead, a straight nose, and clear, expressive eyes. You have the facial features of an honest, upright person. When you speak, your tone is incredibly steady, and you have a habit of looking people dead in the eye, which tells me you have a lot of life experience and a deep-seated stubbornness. Am I right?" Callum shot her an amused sideways glance, experiencing a rare spark of playful intrigue. "What? Do you come from a long line of psychics?" "Nope, my family just writes novels." With that, the stiff atmosphere inside the car instantly dissolved into something light and easy. Olive's phone suddenly rang. Her cousin, whose phone had been turned off this entire time, was finally calling. "My phone died earlier." Chloe laughed sheepishly through the receiver. "Are you here? Are you still at the airport? I'm leaving to pick you up right now." Olive cast a sidelong glance at the man sitting next to her. "I'm currently riding in a car with someone who claims to be a friend of yours. He's driving me to find you." "What?" Chloe shrieked, her voice skyrocketing in panic. You? How can you just trust anyone you meet?" While Chloe was still vehemently condemning her lack of survival instincts, the car pulled up and parked right in front of a quaint little cafe. "We're here," he announced. When Olive stepped out of the car, the expression on Chloe's face, still holding her phone to her ear, was one of absolute shock. She wasn't shocked that her cousin had miraculously found her way there, but rather by the identity of the man who had dropped her off. Back then, Olive had no idea how much of a reputation Callum commanded within the local expat community. He hailed from a deeply entrenched, wealthy family. He had the background, he had the looks, but he was notoriously unapproachable. Chloe only knew him because their families happened to have some overlapping business dealings. Right before he drove off, he rolled down his window and said, "My name is Callum Fitzroy." Olive silently repeated his name a few times in her head, then waved at him, flashing a massive, toothy grin. "Got it. See you around." Entry-level employees possessed zero leverage in the corporate food chain. When the higher-ups decided to shake things up, you simply had to pack up and move. Ever since Callum took over, Two-thirds of the previous CEO's executive support team had been brutally gutted. The deadweight who had coasted by on nepotism and connections were ruthlessly slashed, leaving everyone in a constant state of sheer panic. Olive found herself not only managing her regular duties, but also taking on the grueling role of Callum's personal assistant. Even though her salary had instantly tripled, she didn't particularly care about the money. A printed resignation letter was already sitting in her desk drawer. She was just waiting for the right moment to hand it in, pack her things, and get out. Yet, before she could even lay her cards on the table, Callum beat her to the punch. "You've been working incredibly hard lately. A new personal assistant will be joining us in a few days, so you won't have to carry this much weight anymore." Olive almost suspected the man could read minds, but looking at his equally exhausted, drawn face, she swallowed her intended words. "It's nothing. Just doing my job." What Olive absolutely did not expect was for the new personal assistant to be Marcus. Those flirtatious, sweeping eyes, that shamelessly flashy white suit, and that silver stud glinting in his left ear. It was all far too familiar. Marcus casually slung an arm around Olive's shoulders, flashing a roguish grin. "Long time no see. You've gotten even prettier. Take a hike. Why aren't you down in the tech department? What are you doing playing personal assistant?" Marcus reached up and tapped the silver stud in his ear. "I've been dealing with a bit of glaucoma lately. The doctor said it's from staring at computer screens for too long, so I begged the boss to throw me a bone and let me be his personal assistant." Olive was completely speechless. The boss has been living such a tragic, lonely existence these past few years. "Even I couldn't stand to watch it anymore," Marcus continued. He's practically living like a hermit, absolutely deprived of any earthly desires." "Can't you say a few more words?" Olive let out an exasperated sigh. She wasn't stupid. She understood the blatant hint he was dropping perfectly well. She deliberately changed the subject. "Where's Amanda? She got married." Marcus was a straight shooter, and the words tumbled out before he could catch them. Only after he said it did he realize the implications sounded entirely wrong. He opened his mouth to backtrack, but when he looked up, he saw Callum standing silently in the doorway of the office, having arrived out of nowhere. "If you're here, get inside and report for duty. What are you doing just standing around?" Callum demanded sharply. That night, Olive accompanied Callum to a formal dinner banquet, draining herself until she felt half dead. Callum drove her home afterward. Having consumed a few too many glasses of wine at the party, Olive's stomach was churning uncomfortably. She kept her eyes shut, not uttering a single word, leaving the car interior so quiet that only the faint sound of their breathing could be heard. "Amanda and I are not together," Callum said suddenly. Olive briefly fluttered her eyes open, gave a flat "oh," and closed them again. It seemed he really had overheard their conversation that afternoon. Her reaction was painfully detached, her face completely void of joy or sorrow, and the sight of it made Callum's chest tighten agonizingly. He possessed absolutely zero experience in trying to please someone, let alone knowing what to say to lighten such a suffocating atmosphere. After a long stretch of torturous silence, he finally spoke again. "Have you been doing well these past couple of years?" Olive nodded slowly. "Very well." He couldn't scrape together another topic to save his life. The silence dragged on until she stepped out of the car and shut the door behind her without a shred of hesitation. The icy finality of her emotionless goodbye shattered whatever composure Callum had left. He threw his door open, chased after her into the cold, and grabbed her hand. "Olive, let's start over." In the hush of the softly falling snow, she let out a quiet, fragile laugh. "Why? Is it because Amanda married someone else?" She gently but firmly pulled her fingers free from his grasp. "But you see, I don't want to be anyone's backup option ever again." That chance encounter at the airport had sparked a first love for Olive that consumed 2 entire years of her life. Olive's family was quite well off. Her parents were incredibly open-minded. They never expected her to become a breadwinner, nor did they force her into the traditional pipeline of marriage and children. Their only wish was for her to follow her heart and live a happy, joyful life. Because of this, very few people in the world maneuvered through life with the same unfettered freedom she did. She simply did whatever she wanted. When she decided she wanted to pursue Callum, she straight up asked her cousin for his address and showed up directly at his front door. Her first visit didn't exactly have the best timing. Callum was stuck in a meeting, so she was left to kill time in the reception room. There, she ended up striking up a spectacularly lively conversation with another guest who had arrived after her. When Callum finally emerged, he found the guest enthusiastically speaking German, while Olive cheerfully responded in English. The two of them were essentially talking entirely past each other, yet both were laughing harder than anyone else in the building. Seeing him walk in, Olive wiped away tears of mirth from her eyes. "Callum, hurry up and translate for us. I haven't understood a single syllable he's been saying. I have never in my life seen two people have such a great time without understanding a single word the other is saying," Callum remarked dryly. Olive puffed out her chest with immense pride. "What's the big deal? He's talking about his stuff, I'm talking about mine. I was just telling him a joke." A young man with remarkably pretty, flirtatious eyes stepped out from behind Callum and let out a snort of laughter. "Boss, with social skills like that, I say we hire her right now." The man extended a hand toward her. "Nice to meet you. I'm Marcus, from the tech department. Listen, I have an evening gala to attend tonight, and I'm totally lacking a +1. Would you do me the honor?" Callum promptly grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and unceremoniously shoved him out of the way. "She's my +1. Go find someone else." Olive's heart practically took flight at those words, his +1, even though she had absolutely no clue where they were going that night. The gala was an opulent, open-air affair held at a sprawling country estate. Guests were dressed to the nines in evening gowns and tuxedos. Luxury cars jammed the cobblestone driveway, and the ambient lighting filtered through the trees like dappled starlight. It genuinely felt like a scene ripped straight out of a movie. And that was exactly where Olive met Amanda. In truth, Amanda wasn't overwhelmingly gorgeous. If you threw her into a crowd, she wouldn't stand out, and she certainly lacked the immaculate, polished styling Olive had put together for the evening. She had arrived completely alone, looking haggard and profoundly lonely. Yet, when she spotted Callum, her smile held a strange, childlike vulnerability. "Callum, you're here too." From the very second she appeared, Callum's entire gravitational pull shifted solely to her. "Where is Tyler?" Olive figured Tyler must be Amanda's boyfriend. At the mention of the name, Amanda looked deeply uncomfortable. She shot a hesitant glance at Olive before muttering awkwardly, "We broke up." Callum reached out and gently ruffled her hair. "Stop fighting with him over every little thing." That was the very first time Olive was completely sidelined in an unspoken contest against Amanda. Callum smoothly handed her off to Marcus, who was still wandering around without a date, and walked away to keep Amanda company. Olive and Marcus stood there, staring blankly at each other. Marcus gave her slender shoulder a comforting pat. Heartbroken, Olive forced a massive, blinding smile onto her face. Every exceptional man is going to have countless women pining after him. I'm not surprised he has a bit of history. That just happened because I wasn't around in his past. Now that I'm here, he's definitely going to be mine in the near future. Marcus burst into loud, unrestrained laughter. "Well said. I'm rooting for you." Yet, watching the broad back of the man she liked so cautiously and tenderly guarding another girl, Olive couldn't stop the sharp, unavoidable needle of pain that pierced her heart. For a very long time during her pursuit of Callum, she remained trapped in that exact dynamic. She was the convenient, zero-liability backup option. She accompanied him to high-society banquets. She helped him navigate conversations with difficult clients, all just to earn a single satisfied look or a relaxed smile from him. But the second Amanda materialized, Olive was instantly knocked right back down to the bottom of the ladder. On the day of Olive's 19th birthday, she made a reservation at a nice restaurant and waited. She waited and waited. 2 full hours past their agreed-upon time. The sound of footsteps finally approached. She snapped her head up in eager anticipation, only to find Marcus walking toward her instead. Olive offered a bitter, self-deprecating smile and picked up the glass of red wine sitting next to her hand. "Looks like I'm getting stood up again today." Marcus told her she was going about it all wrong, that men were inherently perverse creatures who needed to feel the panic of potentially losing someone to actually appreciate them. Olive just shook her head softly. "But I can't do that to him. I want so badly to take all the pain he's feeling right now and carry it for him." Olive didn't know how other people experienced falling in love, but she knew exactly how it felt for her. If magic were real, she would cast a spell on Amanda to make her fall madly in love with Callum, just so he wouldn't have to suffer so much for his own unrequited love. Marcus told her she was a complete idiot. Olive never thought of herself as stupid. She just loved him so incredibly much. She loved him so deeply that she couldn't bear the thought of making him even the slightest bit sad. The moment she graduated from college, her aunts became dead set on setting her up with high-quality men. After relentlessly sending messages and pulling strings, Olive finally caved to the pressure and agreed to make a brief appearance. Just one dinner, show her face, and get it over with so they would drop it. The blind date was a lawyer with a fairly prominent reputation in town. He was calm, sharp, possessed an imposing presence, and was objectively handsome. Most importantly, Michael happened to be the outside counsel for their company. Olive leaned in with an extremely cheeky, conspiratorial attitude. "Michael, does your girlfriend know you're out here meeting me?" Michael offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "She does. Look at the girl in the sunglasses, 3 tables to your left." Olive almost broke character completely. "So you literally just came out here to make her jealous?" Without missing a beat, Michael flawlessly sliced into his steak and smoothly volleyed the attack right back. "And did you come out here just to intentionally make Callum uncomfortable?" Olive violently choked on her red wine. Michael politely handed her a napkin, but just as she took it and looked up to thank him, she locked eyes with Callum. He was standing a short distance away with a terrifyingly dark expression on his face, flanked by a few clients, while Marcus stood beside him, watching her with a highly entertained, mischievous smirk. The corner of Olive's mouth twitched uncontrollably. To get out of accompanying Callum to a business dinner, she had specifically faked an illness as an excuse for this blind date. Now, having been caught completely red-handed, all she could do was offer a sheepish, guilty laugh. Callum, a man who normally drew a severe line between business and personal matters, marched straight over without glancing at anyone else. "Michael and Olive, what a coincidence. We've booked a private room. Why don't you join us? It'll be more lively." Naturally, the blind date evaporated into nothingness. When Olive got home that night, her teeth ached for 3 straight days from the stress, and she swore to herself she would never eat steak ever again. Life continued to march on, but rumors about her and the boss began spreading like wildfire through the company, escalating to the point where even Mia came to her desk demanding the truth. The round-faced girl was innocent and painfully blunt. "Is there really nothing going on between you and the boss? You're not the only assistant on the team. He is Marcus too, so why does he bring you along every single time he goes out?" Olive had almost been ostracized to death by 2 other colleagues over this exact issue. She rubbed her temples in exhaustion. "There really is nothing going on. Maybe he just figures since Marcus and I are good friends, bringing me along is more convenient." Mia's eyes practically sparkled with newfound hope. "Does that mean I have a shot?" Olive's fingers paused over her keyboard for a fraction of a second before she resumed typing with forced casualness. Sure. If you want to go after him, go for it. Will you help me come up with a plan?" Olive nodded, letting out a defeated sigh. "As long as you aren't so obvious that you get caught, fine." It was easy to say, but approaching someone like Callum was a monumental task. Within the office, the most Olive could do was manufacture tiny opportunities for Mia to bring him tea or fetch water. Surprisingly, Callum, who was normally utterly dismissive of female employees, treated Mia with a noticeable degree of mildness. After a few interactions, Mia was brimming with confidence, entirely convinced she had a genuine chance. December 12th was Callum's birthday. When he asked Olive out to dinner, and she nodded and said, yes, she saw his face instantly light up with joy, and a sharp pang of guilt struck her heart. Olive handed the birthday cake she had pre-ordered over to Mia, offering a solemn warning. "Make sure you time this right." Mia was so thrilled her cheeks were flushed pink. Screaming, "Olive, I love you," she sprinted off down the highway of romance. Watching the girl's bouncing, energetic figure retreat into the distance, Olive reached out a hand to catch a falling snowflake, suddenly struck by just how freezing the winter air truly was. When loving someone became a habit that had seeped deep into your very marrow, even after years had passed, He still held the power to effortlessly pull at your every emotion. Pushing him toward another girl still physically hurt her heart. At past 1 in the morning, Olive's phone began buzzing violently on her nightstand. She wasn't asleep. She listened to the relentless, stubborn vibration ring out again and again until she finally gave in and answered it. Olive, why are you treating me like this? She threw off her blankets and walked over to the window. His car was parked directly downstairs in the snow. Olive's heart felt even more desolate than the quiet winter night. Callum, we can't go back to how things were. So I am giving you back a vibrant, living, breathing girl, she thought. Time has shown you exactly the kind of person you love. So look closely. Look at how much she resembles me. Look at how much she resembles the version of me I can never, ever return to. Don't you like her? Olive had always despised the rain because someone as restless as her felt completely trapped when there was nowhere to go. It made her too agitated and made it impossible to settle down. But ever since she met Callum, she had fallen deeply in love with rainy days, especially the rain in Kadax. It would pour endlessly, and perhaps because of the lush vegetation, the entire atmosphere would steam with the intoxicating scent of sunlight and fresh greenery. Olive had always assumed a cutthroat businessman like Callum would live in a sterile, icy, black and white minimalist apartment. Instead, his home was filled with woven rattan chairs, vintage antique lamps, silk throw pillows, and warm, Miami-toned walls. It possessed a unique, inviting tenderness. Whenever it rained, Callum loved nothing more than to hole up inside his house, and Olive would invent any excuse she could to go over and find him. A young girl's feelings were painted clearly across her face. She was so passionate and outgoing that it was impossible for anyone to hate her, and Callum was no exception. He didn't dislike her. In fact, he genuinely enjoyed the time they spent together. It was happy, comfortable, and completely free of pressure. The day Amanda got engaged happened to fall exactly on Callum's birthday. Olive spent the entire day toiling away in his kitchen. It wasn't until well past midnight that he finally returned. When the freezing man pushed open his front door, he was greeted by the sight of a tiny figure curled up fast asleep on the sofa, a table full of completely cold dishes, and food still being kept warm on the stove. Hearing the noise, she rubbed her eyes and sat up, looking at him with groggy confusion. You're back. Did you drink a lot again? Let me go make you a cup of coffee, MMPH. He had to admit, the warmth of that single moment melted his heart entirely. This girl was like pure sunshine. He had been continuously siphoning warmth from her without ever giving anything back, without ever making a single promise, yet she continued to throw herself into the fire for him without a second thought. The kiss rapidly escalated in heat and intensity. Her eyes flew wide open as she stared in shock at his face hovering inches from hers, and she responded to him with clumsy, trembling innocence, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Finally running out of breath, she struggled to push him away, gasping in pure panic. I'm going to suffocate. Huff. Callum threw his head back and laughed loudly. Idiot. Amidst his laughter, she rose up on her tiptoes and pressed a quick kiss to his chin, staring at him with bright, shining eyes. Does this mean my suffering is over and we're officially a couple? You kissed me first. So does that mean you're confessing your feelings for me? Looking at her overflowing joy, he smiled softly and nodded. Yes. Back then, Olive's love was remarkably pure and fiercely intense, entirely devoid of any pretense or filter. She threw her arms around Callum and literally jumped up and down in celebration for a solid minute before looking up at him, under his helpless, amused gaze, and asking with shy vulnerability, So, do you like me? Her eyes were brimming with painfully obvious anticipation. Callum could have easily humored her, but instead, he simply bent down and pressed his lips to her forehead. I will treat you well. The brilliant light in her eyes instantly dimmed. Callum noticed it, but at the time, he didn't grasp the gravity of it. He believed he would only ever truly love one person in his lifetime, but he promised to treat Olive well. Wasn't that enough? Those were the absolute happiest days of Olive's life. Outside of work, Callum dedicated almost all of his free time to being with her. In Olive's mind, a stellar girlfriend didn't just need to look flawless at formal events and cook great meals. She also needed to help her boyfriend obliterate his corporate rivals when the timing was right. Because of that, she spent those months obsessively studying foreign languages. Armed with a perfect immersive environment and an outstanding tutor, her progress was nothing short of meteoric. Everything was perfectly aligning with the idealized future she had fantasized about. Callum gave her almost everything he possibly could, completely withholding only those 3 words. I love you. Had it not been for that fateful trip to Sicily, Olive would have truly believed he had finally given his heart to her, chalking his silence up to the classic trope of men refusing to easily verbalize their emotions. She thought she had finally waited out his lingering ghosts and witnessed him letting go of the past, completely unaware that she was still the one destined to be abandoned. She was still just a highly expendable backup plan. The very next day, Mia arrived at the office with swollen, red-rimmed eyes, wearing the devastated expression of someone who had just been harshly rejected. Olive tried to comfort her. There are so many men out there. If this one isn't a good fit, just let it go. Don't be too upset. Olive, you are such an absolute idiot. Huh. Mia's face contorted with fierce, protective indignation. If my boyfriend treated me like nothing more than a cheap replacement, I would have kicked him to the curb instantly. Not to mention that horrifying, life-threatening situation that happened in Sicily later. Olive's gaze slowly chilled, freezing into absolute stillness. She had always assumed a man as immensely proud as Callum would never breathe a word of his past to anyone. Even when rejecting a confession, he would simply offer a cold, ruthless refusal. She could not fathom that he had actually poured out the entire truth to Mia. Olive, Mia began, her voice trembling with anxiety. Actually, even though he was terrible to you in the past, he's genuinely trying to turn over a new leaf now. Look, you loved him so painfully much. If you still have feelings for him, couldn't you give him one more chance? Mia, Olive interrupted, responding with a question of her own. So you were crying all night because your heart broke for me getting hurt, and not because you just got your own heart broken? Mia completely lost track of Olive's logic and numbly nodded her head. Olive smiled warmly and reached out to gently stroke the girl's hair. Well, that puts my mind at ease. I was terrified this whole ordeal would leave some kind of permanent psychological scar on your fragile young mind. Olive, Mia murmured, clearly wanting to push the issue further. But Olive smoothly set down her fork. I'm finished eating. Take your time. After that, Mia tried to bring Callum up several more times, but Olive masterfully and effortlessly derailed the conversation every single time. Eventually, Mia took the hint and stopped mentioning him altogether. Callum, however, had ceased watching her silently from the shadows. He began mirroring the exact way she used to chase him, ensuring he was physically present in front of her every second of the day. Picking her up for work, dropping her off, showering her with agonizingly tender care whenever she was sick, and throwing himself into endless, desperate attempts to win her favor. And through it all, Olive remained like a monk in deep meditation, playing dumb, acting utterly oblivious, and staying entirely unmoved. During a company party, one of the female employees, dripping with sour jealousy, made a snide joke. With Callum putting on such a massive show, is he getting ready to marry our Olive? Without a single second of hesitation, Callum replied, as long as she is willing. He meant every syllable of it, but only he knew the suffocating bitterness hidden beneath those words. Even after launching such a massive, overwhelming offensive, he still had absolutely zero confidence that he could win her heart back. Olive only found out about the exchange the following day. She had skipped the party to take a phone call from her parents, and it was that very conversation with her family that finally solidified her decision to resign. Mia relayed Callum's dramatic public declaration to Olive with a look of profound, teary-eyed emotion. Olive sat in heavy silence for a long time, then picked up her resignation letter and walked straight into his office. Olive, staring down at the resignation letter on his desk, Callum's eyes swam with naked, excruciating agony, finally abandoning the very last shred of his towering pride. Even if I get on my knees and beg you, are you still going to leave me? In her computer, there were still so many photos from the days they spent together. And in the picture frame that had sat on her office desk all year round was a photograph of the villa they used to live in. On the back of that photo was a sentence he had handwritten himself. It was penned on a night when their passion was at its absolute peak. A violent Mediterranean storm was ripping through Cadax, and the olive trees outside the villa were thrashing wildly in the howling wind and torrential rain. She was curled up tightly in his arms, staring out through the glass window at the furious tempest, and asked him in a small, fearful voice, "If one day I end up like those olive trees and get swept away by the wind, where will you go to find me?" At the time, he brushed off the question entirely, never once entertaining the remote possibility that she would ever leave him. "All I have to do is call your name, and you'll come flying right back to me." When the storm finally passed, he snapped a photo of the scenery, had it developed, and wrote on the back, "Come to Cadax. Listen to the waves beneath the olive trees." It was supposed to be his magic spell to summon her back. Later, through the endless, agonizing nights after she vanished from Cadax, he would lie awake, completely unable to sleep, chanting that exact sentence over and over again like a prayer. But he could never summon her back. Olive's family was well aware of her deep feelings for Callum, and they supported her relentlessly. In truth, no matter what path she chose, her parents never mounted any real opposition. At most, they offered gentle guidance from the sidelines to ensure she didn't make any catastrophic mistakes. Because of this, Olive had grown up as a fiercely independent child, making the final call on every major and minor decision in her life. She genuinely felt that her time in Cadax was wonderful. Her language skills were improving at an explosive rate, and being constantly nourished by love had made her practically glow with radiant vitality. Whenever she snapped a selfie and sent it back to her friends, they all marveled at how much more beautiful she had become. She and Marcus eventually became incredibly close friends, and it was slowly, through Marcus's casual slip-ups, that she pieced together the full history between Callum and Amanda. Amanda had been sheltered so securely her entire life that she genuinely treated Callum like an older brother. From the very beginning to the very end, she remained completely oblivious to the fact that he was deeply in love with her. But was she really oblivious from start to finish? That was exactly why, whenever she got hurt, she immediately sought out the person she trusted most in the world, entirely ignorant of the fact that her innocent reliance was nothing short of a sweet, agonizing torture for Callum. When Callum suddenly vanished without a trace for an entire week, only to return covered in fresh injuries, Olive instantly knew that Amanda must have gotten herself into some kind of trouble again. Olive quietly accompanied him to the clinic to get his wounds treated. Her demeanor was so terrifyingly calm that it actually made Callum deeply anxious. He grabbed her hand and frantically tried to explain. A friend of mine ran into a bit of trouble. I promise I'll do a better job protecting myself from now on." Relationships are fundamentally supposed to exist between two people. The moment a third party inserts themselves into the mix, even the most insignificant conflicts are violently magnified. Have you ever considered that perhaps it's your inability to let go, your constant hovering, that's making their relationship so incredibly unstable? Olive spoke the words in a low, even whisper. She didn't bother looking up to gauge his reaction, but she could physically feel the muscles in his body lock up in sudden, rigid shock. Callum stared down at her, absolutely stunned. He had never anticipated she would say something so piercingly accurate. But of course she did. She was so incredibly intelligent. How could she possibly be blind to the reality of his situation? "I'm sorry. I swear I will change," he said. And he proved true to his word. From that day forward, he stopped leaving the room to take Amanda's phone calls, and he actively started drawing boundaries, refusing to over-involve himself in Amanda's daily life. Slowly, Amanda stopped reaching out to him as much. A girl had to grow up eventually, and she couldn't spend her entire existence hiding beneath someone else's wings unless she planned to spend the rest of her life with them. Olive's life in Cadax grew smoother and more idyllic by the day, right up until the news of Amanda's impending wedding reached them. Callum held the formal invitation in his hands, trapped in a long, suffocating silence. Finally, he looked at her. "Olive, go to the wedding with me." Olive reached out and gripped his hand tightly. "Okay. I will go with you so you can finally put an end to your past, and then we will come back to Cadax and start our future." But neither of them could have ever predicted that this trip wouldn't mark the end of his past. It would mark the violent end of her future with him. The wedding took place in Sicily. Amanda's fiancé had deeply offended some very dangerous people. On the actual day of the wedding, a violent crew drove up with the explicit intent of kidnapping the bride. At first, the guests thought it was some kind of elaborate prank, but reality soon set in, and it became terrifyingly clear that these men had come for blood. Olive had never in her wildest nightmares imagined she would be caught up in a situation like this. But what ultimately shattered her spirit, drowning her in a cocktail of pure terror and utter despair, was watching her own boyfriend use his body to shield another woman and drag her away to safety in the midst of the violent chaos, without turning his head back to check on her even once. Olive called her family that day, sobbing until her lungs burned. The phantom sensation of a cold blade sliding against her skin still haunted her every nerve, but it felt as though every single tear she possessed for the rest of her life had been completely drained out of her in that one horrific day. Through the receiver, her parents' voices were pale and trembling, yet overflowing with agonizing heartbreak. "Honey, if you can't survive out there anymore, just come home. You still have your mom and dad." She was a child born to parents who were nearing 50. They were already old when she came into the world, and by the time she had grown into a young woman, they were well into their 70s. They had endlessly spoiled her since the day she was born, completely unable to bear seeing her suffer even a fraction of a grievance. Even when she decided to stay in Kadax instead of returning to finish her degree, her parents handled the entire bureaucratic nightmare for her, securing her a leave of absence from her university. And what exactly had she done with all that love and privilege? She had gone to a foreign country, and for the sake of loving a man, she had ground her own dignity into the dirt and very nearly traded away her own life. Her phone's ringtone continuously echoed through the empty room as Olive sat completely alone in her hotel, hugging her knees to her chest. She cried relentlessly through the entire night, finally making the absolute decision to return to her home country. She had only truly loved one time in her entire life, and it had left her brutally, irreparably shattered. If destiny dictated that she could not have him, then she would let go and walk away with her head held high. After that day, she never received a single piece of news regarding Callum again. In order to sever every possible tie to him, she returned home and moved to a quiet, peaceful city with her parents, completely cutting off all contact with her cousin Chloe as well. In the blink of an eye, for entire years had passed. "Olive, you still love me, don't you?" His face looked as though he were on the absolute verge of breaking down in tears. He looked so devastatingly pathetic, so utterly consumed by despair, completely stripped of the high-spirited, commanding presence he normally carried. So many cycles of the sun and moon had turned over, leaving the past too painful to look back on. A thick layer of mist slowly rose over Olive's eyes. Yes, she couldn't bear to throw away the physical memories. She had deleted every digital trace and scrubbed every connection to him from her life. But that single printed photograph was the one thing she had kept. "I kept it, but not because I'm waiting for you," she said softly. "I kept it because I genuinely loved the version of myself from that year." She loved the girl who had fought with absolutely everything she had, asking for nothing in return, crashing blindly forward through the world like a complete, beautiful fool. Stepping out of the corporate building, the heavy rain had finally passed. The massive storm clouds were being blown apart by the fierce wind, allowing the blazing, passionate sunlight to scorch the earth once more. Olive raised a hand to shield her eyes from the blinding glare, feeling as though she had suddenly been transported right back to those early, intoxicating days in a foreign land. Even at the very end, he still completely failed to understand. He didn't understand that, even though he had abandoned her countless times, leaving her covered in invisible, bleeding scars, she still fiercely loved him. She only loved him, completely without regret, and not even the relentless passage of time could forcefully alter the shape of her heart. But the truth was, she no longer possessed the raw, fearless courage to throw her entire life on the line like she did that year. And so, the only thing left to do was to let him go, to let him wander out into the world and stumble into another pure, untainted love. Time kept moving forward, but what truly ground a great love to dust was never the passing of time itself. it was the damage inflicted. No matter how impossibly deep a love ran, it would inevitably be squandered and bled dry by the relentless, compounding weight of being hurt over and over again. Olive had once kissed the fierce wind and crashing waves of Kadax, standing absolute and unwavering in the heart of that terrifying tempest. But eventually, all of it had to be left behind in the past. Callum stood completely frozen before the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. He watched that slender, fragile silhouette walk out of the company doors, cross the zebra-striped crosswalk, and march straight ahead into the distance, never once turning her head to look back. Suddenly, his legs broke into a dead sprint, tearing toward the stairs to chase her down. How could he possibly just stand there and let her walk away? How could he have been stupid enough to fall for such a clumsy, transparent lie? If he let go this time, he knew with absolute certainty that no matter how far he traveled in this life, she would be the one person forever lost to him. And that was a price he could no longer afford to pay.